The 1970s were a great year for black music. It was in that era that hip-hop was born. From the streets of the Bronx in New York, hip-hop has had a rich and diverse history, and there have been many notable events that have shaped the genre over the years. But none is as monumental as the beef between record labels Death Row and Bad Boy Records. In the 1990s, these two were at the center of a feud that rocked the music industry to the core, with the impact still felt to this day. Tupac, Suge Knight, the notorious B.I.G., and Sean Diddy Combs were at the center of it all. What caused the animosity between these two record labels? And how did it escalate into violence that claimed the lives of two of the most iconic rappers of all time? Stick with us as we explore the great beef together. In 1991, a record label was born that would forever change the landscape of hip-hop music. Death Row Records, co-founded by music mogul Suge Knight, along with Dr. Dre, Dick Griffey, and the DOC. The label would go on to produce some of the most iconic and influential hip-hop albums of all time. The origin story of the record label started when Dr. Dre was preparing to depart from Ruthless Records. He teamed up with Suge Knight, the DOC, and Dick Griffey to start a new record label and music partnership. The rappers in Death Row Records were some of the most successful and influential artists of the 1990s, led by founder Suge Knight and musical visionary Dr. Dre. The label boasted a roster of talent that included Tupac Shakur, Snoop Dogg, and The Dogg Pound, among others. Tupac Shakur, in particular, was one of the most successful rappers of all time. He released several multi-platinum albums while signed to Death Row, including All Eyes on Me and The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory. Snoop Dogg was another hugely successful artist on the Death Row roster. His debut album, Doggy Style, was a massive commercial success, selling over 11 million copies worldwide. He continued to release successful albums throughout the 1990s and has remained a prominent figure in the hip-hop world. Other Death Row artists, such as The Dogg Pound and Nate Dogg, also enjoyed success during the label's heyday. The label's unique blend of G-funk and gangsta rap helped to shape the sound of hip-hop in the 1990s and beyond. But then, Death Row Records wasn't the only label making waves in the early 90s. In 1993, a young A&R executive and producer named Sean Puff Daddy Combs founded Bad Boy Records, a New York-centered hip-hop label. In 1993, Sean Diddy Combs decided to start his own label and convinced Wallace, who he had been managing at the time, to join him. Together, they began laying the foundation for Bad Boy Records. The label's first release was Flavor in Your Ear, a single by rapper Craig Mack. The song became an instant hit, peaking at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart and introducing Bad Boy Records to the world. From there, the label quickly signed a number of other talented artists, including Faith Evans, Total, and 112. One of the keys to Bad Boy Records' success was its ability to blend hip-hop with R&B and soul music. The fusion of genres was evident on many of the label's biggest hits. The label also had a reputation for being flashy and extravagant, with Combs leading the charge. Videos and performances were often over the top, featuring expensive cars, luxurious clothing, and lavish parties. This image helped to solidify Bad Boy Records as one of the most glamorous and exciting labels in hip-hop. However, the label was not without its controversies. But despite these challenges, Bad Boy Records continued to thrive throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s. The label released a string of successful albums, with multiple awards and loads of records sold. It became obvious that they and Death Row were the biggest rap labels in hip-hop. The two outfits had the biggest rappers in the game, Biggie and Tupac, and with the tension in the air prior to the formation of the two record labels, it was only a matter of time before they clashed. In the late 1980s, West Coast hip-hop was doing well with popular acts like NWA from Compton, California. Then, on November 12, 1991, a rapper named Tim Dog from the Bronx released an album called Penicillin on Wax. In it, he made fun of West Coast artists in some skits and included a diss track aimed at NWA's new members, especially Dr. Dre, called Fuck Compton. Dr. Dre responded a year later on his first solo album, The Chronic. Although Tim Dog didn't stay involved in the conflict for long, his diss track was an early sign of what was to come. 1994 was where it all began. In November 1994, Tupac went to Quad Studios in Manhattan to record with Lil Sean. Members of Junior Mafia, affiliated with Bad Boy, greeted him on the street. But as soon as he entered the building, two gunmen ordered everyone in the lobby to the floor. Tupac hesitated and was shot 5 times and robbed. As he was taken out on a stretcher, he showed his middle finger to Biggie and other Bad Boy affiliates present. The next day, Tupac was found guilty of sexual abuse. Later, in an interview with Kevin Powell of Vibe, Tupac implied that Biggie, Puff Daddy, and Andre Harrell of Uptown Records were responsible for the attack at Quad Studios. Puff Daddy visited Tupac at Rikers Island before the article was published and assured him that Bad Boy had nothing to do with the shooting. But whatever Puffy was selling, Pac wasn't buying it, especially with the release of the track, Who Shot Ya? On February 21, 1995, Who Shot Ya was released by the Notorious B.I.G. from his Big Papa single. While Biggie and his producer Sean Puff Daddy Combs denied any involvement in Tupac's shooting that had occurred months earlier, the lyrics of Who Shot Ya were interpreted by rival rapper Tupac Shakur as a direct taunt aimed at him. Despite Biggie's insistence that the song had been recorded before the shooting, the release of Who Shot Ya only served to further fuel the flames of the East Coast-West Coast rivalry, ultimately leading to a violent and tragic end for both Biggie and Tupac. In the summer of 1995, tensions between the East and West Coast hip-hop scenes had reached a boiling point, and the release of Biggie's track only took things to another level, and nowhere was this more evident than at the year's Source Awards in New York City. It was here that Suge Knight, CEO of Death Row Records, took the opportunity to take a swipe at his East Coast rival, Sean Puff Daddy Combs. Addressing the assembled crowd of artists and industry figures, Knight declared, "Any artist out there who wants to be an artist and wants to stay a star and don't have to worry about the executive producer trying to be in all the videos, all on the records, dancing, come to Death Row." To the New York audience, Knight's comments were seen as a direct attack on the East Coast hip-hop scene, and the crowd responded with boos and jeers. The tension only intensified when Dr. Dre was named Producer of the Year, prompting another round of boos from the audience. In response, Death Row artist Snoop Doggy Dogg took to the stage, snatching the microphone from Dr. Dre and asking the crowd, "The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre, and Snoop Dogg and Death Row, y'all don't love us? Y'all don't love us? Well, let it be known then, we don't give a fuck. We know y'all East Coast, we know where the fuck we at." The incident at the Source Awards would go down in history as one of the most defining moments of the East Coast-West Coast feud, further fueling the flames of a rivalry that would ultimately lead to the tragic deaths of two of rap's biggest icons. But there was more to come, as Tupac got involved with Biggie's partner and R&B singer, Faith Evans. In October 1995, Tupac met Biggie's estranged wife, Faith Evans, who was also a singer signed to the Bad Boy record label. According to Evans, Tupac offered her a sum of $250,000 to collaborate with him on a track. After Evans recorded her part, however, Tupac refused to pay her unless she agreed to have sex with him. Evans declined the offer, and rumors of their encounter began to circulate. Evans denied any romantic or sexual involvement with Tupac, but he and his associate, Suge Knight, did not shy away from suggesting otherwise. In January 1996, during an interview with Lynn Hitchberg of the New York Times, they hinted that Tupac had been in a relationship with Evans, stating that she had given him gifts and that he had repaid her with what he implied were sexual favors. This article did not sit well with Biggie, who flew into a rage after hearing about it. He confronted Evans aggressively, but publicly. He tried to downplay the situation as a joke. However, tensions between the two rappers continued to escalate, and Tupac made his insinuations about Evans explicit in his song, Hit 'Em Up. In the world of hip-hop, diss records are a time-honored tradition. Artists use their lyrics as weapons, hurling insults and calling out their rivals in an attempt to establish dominance in the industry. But of all diss records in hip-hop history, none have had quite the same impact as Tupac Shakur's Hit 'Em Up. Released in 1996, Hit 'Em Up was a direct attack on Notorious B.I.G. and his record label boss, Puff Daddy. Hit 'Em Up took the feud to a new level, with Tupac unleashing a barrage of insults and personal attacks aimed squarely at Biggie and Puffy. The track's aggressive tone and confrontational lyrics were a departure from the more subtle disses of previous generations. Tupac held nothing back, using every low blow he could think of to decimate his perceived enemies. The impact was immediate and seismic, sending shockwaves through the industry. Hit 'Em Up raised the bar for diss records, establishing a new standard for ruthlessness and lyrical savagery. In the aftermath of its release, the landscape of hip-hop was forever changed. The industry became even more competitive, and the stakes were raised for artists looking to prove themselves in a genre built on one-upmanship. In Hit 'Em Up, Shakur also went after a lot of other rappers, particularly those in Bad Boy Records. He called out rappers like Lil Kim and Junior Mafia as fakes and phonies, pretending to be street toughs and gangsters when they were really just playing a role. But Shakur wasn't just talking the talk, he was also walking the walk. He physically attacked members of Bad Boy Records on multiple occasions, including a famous incident in which he and his entourage beat up Biggie's friend and fellow rapper, Big Stretch Walker. Even other rappers weren't safe from Shakur's wrath. Bronx rapper Chino XL found himself on the receiving end of Tupac's insults after he made vulgar comments about Shakur on his track Riot. Sean Carter, aka Jay-Z, also got a shout out in the track. Shakur initially included a diss towards the now legendary rapper in one of his songs, but later decided to remove it after being convinced by his Outlaws crew that Jay-Z had nothing to do with the ongoing conflict between Death Row and Bad Boy. Biggie at this point knew he had to respond, and he did just that in a track with Jay-Z. In the aftermath of the song's release, Biggie vehemently denied any involvement in the shooting incident that had left Tupac wounded and insisted that the track was nothing more than a baseless attack. Biggie also took issue with Tupac's insinuations that his song Who Shot Ya was aimed at Tupac, claiming that the song had actually been written before the shooting incident had even occurred. As for the lyrics directed at his wife, Faith, Biggie expressed skepticism, asserting that he could find no merit in Tupac's claims. Regardless, he believed that Tupac's true intentions was to attack him through Faith, even though he remained unsure if anything had happened between the two. Ultimately, Biggie felt that if anything had occurred, it was none of his business, and Tupac should not have publicly disclosed it in a song. In response to these accusations, Biggie and Jay-Z released a joint track titled Brooklyn's Finest, which served as a retaliatory strike against Tupac's attack. With so much tension in the air, it was only a matter of time before things got really ugly. And it did. It was September 7, 1996, when the world lost a legend, Tupac Shakur. The rapper was shot in a drive-by shooting at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane in Las Vegas, Nevada. He was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, he passed away 6 days later at the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. The motive behind the shooting was reportedly retaliation by a Compton gang called the Southside Crips. It was said that they wanted to avenge the beating of one of their members by Tupac just a few hours earlier. Orlando Anderson, the Crip whom Tupac had attacked, was believed to have fired the fatal shots. Interestingly, Las Vegas police didn't see Anderson as a suspect, and they only briefly interviewed him. Anderson was later killed in an unrelated gang shooting nearly 2 years after the incident. Just 6 months after Tupac's tragic death, Biggie Smalls met a similar fate when he was gunned down in a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles, leaving fans and fellow musicians alike in shock and mourning. In the wake of these devastating losses, efforts were made to bring peace to the feuding factions of East Coast and West Coast rappers. Louis Farrakhan led a peace summit at Mosque Mariam after Tupac's death, and another one was held after Biggie's shooting in March 1997. Even Snoop Dogg and Combs, two prominent figures in the feud, publicly called for an end to the violence during a press conference in February of that year. The notorious B.I.G. and Tupac may have passed away at early ages, but their legacy lives on. The untimely deaths were the highlight of the golden age of hip-hop when two record labels, Death Row and Bad Boy Records, held the world of rap music down. The hostilities of the 90s might serve as a nostalgia now, but they remain a tragic reminder of the devastating consequences of violence and division.